Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah. Yep. Hi, how are you? We used to work together, so. So my name is Robert Hansen. I have many monikers. One of them is Arsnake. One of them is the smartphoneexec.com. So for those who don't know me, I present all over the world, and I wrote some books, presented at the Pentagon, all kinds of crazy stuff. But the CEO of the smartphone exec thing is kind of my favorite side project at the moment. I'm basically trying to do everything from a phone. Everything. Which is actually really, really challenging and slow and annoying, as you might expect. I do have peripherals. I promise it's not just literally my phone. I have a keyboard and stuff. But it's a really interesting challenge. At some point, I'll probably do a presentation about what it actually means to do it and the pros and cons, pitfalls, things you need to be successful to do it. It's a really fun project. But in the meantime, if you want to go check out the website, it says a lot of stuff on there. I'm also the CEO of Outside Intel, which is basically a business intelligence platform, which I will talk about offline at some point if you guys want to. Black Hat Review Board and a bunch of other crap. So important notice, does anyone have a Galaxy 7? You're going to have to take it to the trash in the back. We don't need any explosions here. No? No? Okay, good. No, an actual public service announcement, though. Is anyone here looking for a job? Raise your hand if you are. Literally no one here is looking for a job? That's kind of amazing. Okay, never mind. You can't admit it? Okay, is anyone hiring? Okay. If you're looking for a job and you see someone with their hand up, go talk to them. Okay? So last year I talked a little bit about business risk, pre-compromise. So how much does it cost to fix versus how much do you expect to lose if the bad thing happens? And if you plot that out, you can figure out where the expected value of loss of all these vulnerabilities are and fix in order towards the efficient frontier of whatever curve you pick for your organization. Does anyone sort of get what I'm saying there? Basically what that means is if you're trying to identify the things in your organization that matter to you, that really matter to you and not just matter in a vulnerability scanner, you're much more likely to be fixing the things that actually matter. And in fact, there are probably a bunch of vulnerabilities that are too expensive to fix. And we always kind of intuitively know that that is true. Like if I walk around and I say in a bubble and I've got like this armored plating around me because I'm worried about tripping and falling, sure, I'm less likely to get hurt tripping and falling, but what is the cost associated with it? It's too high. And we know that instinctively, and we spend a lot of time avoiding those types of costs in our life. We do not purchase the extra insurance on the car. You know, we do not do these things that we know just aren't important. We don't need to do them. The likelihood of risk is too small. So we're really good at talking about these things intellectually, but there's a whole sort of area that we've been missing, or at least people I talk to have been missing. So in our world, there's many forms of risk. The one that we in this group tend to be most comfortable with is if an attacker comes and compromises a site. Takes the data from the application, repurposes it for whatever reason that they want to repurpose it, and does something bad with it. That's our bread and butter. That's what we do all day, right? There's other types of risks that we intellectually know are true as well. For instance, IP class action lawsuits. I'm sure one or more of you have been in a conference room with a lawyer who said, oh, we're getting sued for blah, or we have to protect our intellectual property from XYZ or whatever. And that is something that you may not directly get involved with very much, but you know it's out there. And you probably have been asked to help out on patent issues or is somebody stealing our content or something like that. And that's a pretty well understood area of security risk that we're all pretty comfortable with. We don't do it necessarily, but we're aware of it. But the last one that we really don't deal with in security very much is if Google, for some reason, decides that we shouldn't be on the page for whatever keyword that we want to rank for, and we stop making money, we don't have a business anymore. That is a real risk. Your job is actually really at risk if your company can't afford to pay you. The company cannot perform its operations if it can't get clients, if it can't convert them into paying customers or whatever. And this isn't like a theoretical risk or something. This happens all the time. Companies all the time cannot get the leads that they need to transform them into paying customers. Happens all the time. So we don't typically get involved in this, though. This is a marketing effort. We basically say, we're like, marketing handles marketing stuff. There's somebody who blogs for us, I think. There's somebody out there doing social media stuff, I think. You might have met them in the hallway or something, but it's not something you deal with in your day-to-day job. But it is incredibly important to the company. And I'm going to explain why it's going to become your job very, very quickly. So if you want to talk about SEO, which stands for Search Engine Optimization, if you have never heard that term, it's a very widely used term in marketing. So if you go type that term in, you'll get probably a couple 100 million responses from people who want to tell you all about SEO. But basically, if there is a fixed amount of search engine results on any given page, and there typically is, call it 10 or 20 or whatever, but it's a fixed amount. If there's a fixed amount of search engine results and there's a certain amount of people fighting for that position, so if you're not the only person in that particular line of business or trying to optimize for that one particular keyword because you just made it up or something, if you're not in that realm, then fine. You probably don't have to optimize. If there's no competition, if there's nobody fighting for that position, if it's not a fixed amount of search engine results, then fine, you can go and relax. But we don't live in that world. We live in a world where optimization is critical to businesses. And they will spend, you think our budgets are large. You think like billions of dollars being spent is large. I've been in conversations where hundreds of millions of dollars are spent on a single advertising campaign for a single company. They'll outspend security 10 times over trying to optimize. So this is a real amount of money being really spent on stuff. So let's talk about Google for a second. So who here uses Google for their daily search engine, like the thing that you use the most? Okay, so almost every single one of you. Perfect. All right. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Would you guys who use Google agree that Google has the best search engine and therefore that is why you use it? No? Then why would you use it if you don't? Yeah, right? Yes, most of you agree that it's the best at delivering the results that you're looking for, right? Yes? Come on, give me, I know it's early in the morning. Yeah, okay, good. All right, so would you also agree that you're more likely to click on things that are surfaced? So you're not going to click on the 10th page. You're not going to click on a link at the bottom. You're more likely to click on stuff that's visually right in front of you. Is that true? Okay. So then would it also stand to reason that if something were outside of the purview of where you see, that it is effectively not really a search result? I mean, it's not something you're going to interact with. So therefore, it's basically pointless for it to be there, except giving you the comfort and knowledge that you could get to it if you wanted to. Right? Okay. So most of you probably were not on the internet when it first started, but when Google very, very first started, all they were was search results. They didn't actually have anything other than search results. Now they've turned into an advertising engine. So I did not cherry pick this particular screenshot, but let's analyze it. So at the very top left, you'll see the Google logo. If you click that, where do you go? Google. If you type in something other than hotels in Austin and click enter, where do you go? Search results on Google. If I click all or maps or shopping or news or images or more or any of the sublinks under more or search tools, where do I go? Right. If I click on the yes, get Chrome now, where do I go? Google Chrome, and I get Google stuff. If I click on that little blob thing of pixels or sign in, where do I go? Google. Now, here's sort of the meat of the page. If I click any of the things that say add there, where do I go? Right. You get money for Google. And then lastly, before this page scrolls off to the bottom, there's a map page. And if I click into that, where am I going? Okay. So there is not a single thing on this page, and I did not cherry pick this. This is just hotels in Austin, something that any travelers coming here will have probably typed in. And there's many, I probably have 100 different examples of it. Unfortunately, most of the examples have one search result on them. So they're even though they have more ads, they have one search result, so it didn't quite make the point. But this is what I'm talking about. you're not just in competition with other companies who are directly fighting for whatever keyword we're talking about. Let's say you sell t-shirts or something. You're also in competition with Google, who wants to take that search result away from you. So now you all agreed if it's outside the purview of where you see, you're much less likely to click on it. So you are in fact much more likely to stay on a Google property. If you remember the Olympics, if you type in anything like medal count or who won whatever competition it was or whatever, you're not going to go to ESPN. You're not going to go to CNET or whatever. You're not going to go to Wikipedia if you type in the name of some city. You're going to land on Google, and they're going to keep you there because they want, it's called the Great Scrape and Replace. They're basically taking all that content and keeping it on Google so that you will not go to other people's websites. So if you're trying to convert, if you're trying to actually get someone to buy your t-shirt, or if you're trying to get someone to stay at your hotel, you now have a much higher burden to get to the same level that you used to be able to get to when Google got started. So it's not just a competition with other marketers, you're now in competition with Google. That's sort of an aside, but it's something you should be aware of. It's a real thing. So SEO risk spectrum is kind of an interesting thing to think about. There's a lot of different versions of ways for marketers to screw each other over. So the first one is if your competitor does something positive for themselves, for instance, they buy some keywords or do some better blogging or whatever. That's one way to improve their ranking above you, to get higher than you in the search engine results page. The second one is your incompetence. If you do something stupid or fail to do something, that is your problem and it will sink your search engine results page. And then the last one is the more malicious, and we'll get to all of these, but which is called negative SEO. And this is what my whole presentation is actually about. I know it sounded like a bit of a Google rant, but it's more important than that. So let's talk about positive SEO. Here's some examples of things you do if you're trying to encourage your brand to do better in the search engine results page. So writing a good content and getting good engagement. So if you have a really powerful blog post with a lot of really good content on it, people are more likely to interact with it and people are more likely to continue to stay on the page. Super simple. We all kind of intuitively know that that's true. If you write a good blog post, a lot of people comment on it, and you get more clicks and more engagement, and people are more likely to convert, and so on and so on. Fixing broken links, super simple. You got a bunch of links pointing to somewhere. If you don't fix them, Google's just going to assume your site's broken. You lose the link equity, that's what it's called. Using something called rel canonical. Does anyone know what that is? Has anyone ever heard of the rel canonical? Seen it maybe in HTTP? No? So there's a header that you can add called rel canonical that basically tells Google that every page that you're, if you have a rel canonical on page A and it's pointing to page B, treat page A as if it's page B. That's all it means. And this is super important because a lot of times you'll have pages that are basically identical, but like maybe the words are slightly different or whatever, and really you're saying the same thing, it's just sort of a different landing page, and you're trying to test for conversion optimization or something, and you don't want Google to treat them as separate pages. You really want them to treat them as one page. So use rel canonical to tell Google that the other page is the important one. Disavowing by something called nofollow, which is a thing you can add to Ahref. So you go Ahref, nofollow, blah, blah, blah. And that basically tells Google, do not count this link to another page as if it's valuable, as if I'm trying to pass link equity. Don't give it value. And the reason this is important is a lot of spammers will put random stuff on your website, and if they link back to their super spammy website, Google thinks you're linking to a bunch of spammy websites. So what you're basically doing is disavowing the fact that that link even exists. You're like, there is a link here, but don't count it against me. That's just something someone put here. And then building a sitemap.xml file. And if you don't know what this is, you should definitely look at it. It's actually one of the fastest ways to figure out what's going on in a web application. You just go to this thing called sitemap.xml. It's usually in the root directory. You can often find it in robots.txt. And what it'll basically say is, here's all of the stuff, Google. Go find it, go crawl it, figure out where my site is, go look at the whole thing, right? So by doing that, you're basically telling Google, don't bother with the whole like actually crawling my site. You don't need to figure out where everything is. I'll just tell you where everything is. That way you'll find it, which is a much faster way to get Google to find all the nooks and crannies of your website. So this is the positive stuff. This is the stuff, if your marketing team isn't doing this, they are not a good marketing team. This is just typical marketing stuff that every marketing team should be doing. So these are the more levels of incompetence. This is the stuff that people do when they sort of fail to do the previous things, as an example. Forgetting that a site ever existed. This is super common. I mean, you guys have all run across some marketing site with like copyright 2009, right? You know, there's someone that has long ago forgotten. I mean, that whoever built that site has left the company like a decade ago or something. But yet it's still there, it's still running, it's probably got malware on it, you know, who knows, right? That Google notices that. They notice that a site never updates. They will still continue to give it some link equity, but they're not going to crawl it rapidly anymore. They know better. Is it for me? No? All right. I'm just trying to turn off my phone, but I realize that is my phone, so I don't need to worry about it. It's a force of habit. I'm really tired. I was up at 2 a.m. and I suddenly had this pop. I'm like, what if I were president? What would I do? I'm like, it's right there, the entire night ruined. I was like awake, solid from 2 o'clock in the morning. So, yeah, it's scary. You're right. So you can break the site by a bad robots.txt. It's super common. You inadvertently block a certain path. You forget, like, oh shoot, I forgot that this was blocked off. Maybe we did it during testing phase. We didn't want Google to crawl it yet, but it's still there. No one ever removed it. We're inadvertently getting no traffic to a bulk of our web page. Super common. Circular 301s, or 302s, or whatever redirects. If you have a site A redirects to site B, which redirects back to site A, and so on, just keeps doing it, pinging back and forth, Google will eventually give up and just assume your site's broken, which it is. Duplicate content. This is the one that most people just totally don't understand. If you have 2 pages that are identical, for instance, www.whatever.com and not www.whatever.com, and they're exactly the same page and you don't use rel canonical, Google assumes that this is just duplicate content and basically halves your SEO. They'll give 1/2 to the other. It's not exactly how it works, but more or less. They will give half to one and half to the other. So if you don't use rel canonical and you do allow your content to be distributed out, a lot of people say, oh, go ahead and republish my blog post, not really thinking what the ramifications of that are. Now you have duplicate content. So now it's sort of a race condition. Which one does Google think was first? They'll give a little bit more to the one they think is first, devalue the other one, which you can get in a weird situation if you pre-release content and people are like, go ahead and publish this, but link back to me or something. You can get into weird issues like that, so don't do it. And then failing to optimize for keywords. If you sell t-shirts and you talk about how rad and tubular you are, but don't talk about t-shirts, you're not going to sell a lot of t-shirts. So these are all sort of the negligence things that are super common that people do all the time. But we're going to talk about the more interesting stuff, the negative stuff. So why does negative SEO exist in the first place? I think this is kind of, it's important to know how we got to where we are. And I think that the important thing to understand is where you have penalties, you will in fact create a market for those penalties. If I can somehow reduce your SEO by giving you a penalty that you didn't deserve, I can in fact raise myself up. It kind of makes sense, right? If you only have a fixed number of positions on the search engine results page, you can force other people down and then you go up. If you're the only other person there, you're going to be at the top. So it's been created by the fact that Google assumes they're good at penalties, and they are not good at penalties. They are okay at it in certain circumstances where it's very cut and dry, like if they see a gigantic link network, for instance, of 100,000 pages all linking to one thing, they can be pretty sure that that's just a very thin landing page full of bogus content that they probably scraped from somebody or programmatically created using Markov or something like that. So if you can create this badness, not through incompetence, but through malice, not through them doing it, but by you doing it, you have created a way to take your competition down. And this is extremely common amongst the high-end SEO crew. And so I go and hang out with these very malicious marketing people on a very regular basis. I would even call them my friends. But this is the kind of tactic that they use to go after people. And so I'll start showing you some of that. But basically the 3 things that they're going to attack. Number 1, availability. Google cares if your site is up. If your site's not up, they just assume that they probably shouldn't link to you. Now, this actually really makes sense, and there's various different reasons that this makes sense. But But if you think about it from like the Google Plexus perspective, if someone were to click on a link and not go to wherever they thought they were supposed to go, not see what they're supposed to see, or it would take a long time for the content to load, in whatever capacity we're talking about, that's probably not a page that they should be linking to. So they will in fact devalue you if they can't see that your site's online. So that's a super, super common thing for them to attack, availability. Next is reputation. If they can somehow make your site look like a spam site or look like an adult site, which maybe not everyone should be looking at, or look like a site that's trying to do something malicious to their users, Google notices that. And they will say, okay, well, we should probably attach a penalty to them because we don't want our consumers who are using our search engine to feel like Google is an untrustworthy place to find links. And then lastly, attacking PageRank itself, or rank brain. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that term, but it's the new term for PageRank. So whenever I say PageRank, inadvertently, what I really mean is PageRank or rank brain, whatever you want to call it. What that really means is, what is the algorithm that Google uses to or make you go higher or lower? And there's lots of different ways to make that happen. But if you can attack any one of those three things, you're effectively making it very difficult for them to be on the top of the search engine results page. So, what can it be used for? Number one, cold competitors. We already talked about that one. That's a pretty obvious one. It can also be used prior to acquisition talks. So we saw this happen a little bit with some companies. For instance, Yahoo got some rumors that they were going to possibly sell for like $1 billion, which completely tanked their stock price. That made it very difficult for them to get a good acquisition, just based on a couple of rumors. I mean, this is probably like 20 minutes worth of work for somebody who does who understands marketing and understands how social works. I mean, reducing a company's value by a couple $1 billion in a couple of tweets is pretty remarkable if you think about it. It can be used to change stock prices. Very similarly to what I just said, it's not just whether you're going through an acquisition or not. They can actually make you less valuable, less attractive to venture financiers or to people who do equity buys. Brand protection, or ORM, online reputation management, for those of you who are not familiar with that term, which basically means somebody is doing something bad to you, so you do something bad to them to reduce their search engine results so they fall off. So if someone searches for arsenic, they're not going to find me in the bikini or whatever. They'll find me on stage looking all awesome, right? So that's online reputation management. If I can force other people to rank worse than me, you'll start seeing me. And this is super, super, super common, especially with photography. So Google search for images is also very common when you're talking about executives. Executives like this service a lot, and they leverage it very heavily. I know some guys who focus exclusively on just that. You can do it for random hatred or political purposes. We see this happen all the time, somewhat successfully. Russia, for instance, is doing it right now. If I were president, right? Either, it works. The things that pop in your head, right? It's like, oh, great. My whole night's totally ruined. So if it wastes your company, the opposing company's time or resources, so that they cannot spend that time doing something else. There's lots of ways to sort of spin up the bee's nest or the hornet's nest and get them talking amongst themselves and wasting a lot of time and not focusing on what they should be doing, which is improving their company and getting more customers or acquiring new leads or whatever they're supposed to be doing. So the typical formula for identifying what would make a good SEO, negative SEO candidate is take good advice and reverse it. Whatever a marketing person says you should be doing, do the exact opposite of that to your competitor. That is negative SEO. And people, for some reason, even in the marketing industry, believe this doesn't exist for some reason. Like, I gotta tell you, I've met a lot of people who are actively doing this, so it definitely exists. So for example, have keywords in your backlinks related to your brand and get backlinks from high PR page rank sites. So if I'm selling t-shirts, make sure that Forbes is talking about t-shirts and pointing back at me. They have good brand equity, Google trusts them, they're gonna pass more link equity back to me, and therefore I'm more likely to rank for that keyword, right? And I'm more likely to get traffic as a result because I go higher in the search engine results. The opposite of that would be make your competitors' backlinks have spammy keywords from bad neighborhoods. So start putting in like Viagra, amphetamine, whatever, like all these like really spammy things and point them at the domain. And suddenly Google's like, whoa, this site's trying to sell like drugs, like hardcore, prescription drugs. Maybe this isn't what we want to show somebody when we're showing someone t-shirts, because that's not what they're looking for, right? They're looking for something very different. So they might start ranking ever so slightly for a different keyword, but they have to now do a tremendous amount of effort within Google to find and then disavow all of those backlinks, which is bad. And then you basically rinse and repeat. You just keep doing the same thing over and over. And the reason you do it over and over is because you're just adding more work on them. So it's a very little amount of work for you, a huge amount of work for them to find, identify, disavow, and it takes time. So the spectrum of negative things you could do is pretty various, pretty wide. So I'm going to talk about a lot of these. But so the first category is helping me hurts you. So this would be the ORM case. So if I use like UDRP process, does everyone know what this is, by the way? Wow, you guys definitely should know what this is. So you can take people's domains from them. Do you know that? It's called UDRP. You just hire a lawyer and say, that's my domain, and if it's got your name in it, you can prove somehow that you have copyright over it or something, you can just take it from them. So if they say your brand sucks, you're like, well, it's got my brand name in it, it's mine, and then you can use UDRP and take it. It's pretty awesome. So you can harm your competition when they're trying to harm you. So it helps me and it hurts you in the process. Same thing with right to be forgotten. Does everyone know what that is? Good. So you can do that at least overseas. You can't do it here, but it really helps if you have at least one or two executives that just happen to be positioned over there, or if one of your executives starts misbehaving, just have them move to Europe. And then they get to use right to be forgotten. It's amazing. So the next one is helping you in a negative way. So giving you spammy links is the obvious one of that. Bad reviews on Yelp, another good example of that. And then the last is directly attacking you somehow. So this would be going after your availability or something. So denial of service attacks are probably the most common, but there's other things you can do, hacking and so on. So as an example, I took some website that has 200 good things you can do from an SEO perspective, and I just took a random sampling throughout it wasn't so random, these are more the interesting ones, but a vaguely random sampling of some of the more interesting things, and you can check it out. I'll put this online or whatever so you guys can read it better. But basically the ranking factors, there's 200 of them in this one particular article. There's a lot more than 200, by the way. But this particular article had 200, so I just started to start parsing them. So this is 1 through 17. Number 1, domain age. So Google cares if your domain is old. That's why .edu links are so valuable, and that's why you see .edus getting hacked a lot. It's not just because foreign nationals want to figure out what people are studying and what they're going to do and who they're sleeping with. It's also because those domains are very old. And when you put links on a really old domain, Google treats them with more respect. They think that they're probably more interesting because those domains have survived a lot longer. So you can do domain takedown requests, UDRP, that kind of stuff to take it down. Just get rid of it. Just take it, literally get it offline. And that works pretty well. Domain history, which basically means if the domain has always been good, then there's no reason to apply any penalties to it. If it's always been bad and suddenly tries to become good, I don't know, just continue not to trust it. So they'll apply like sort of long-term negative effects to it. So basically take over the domain and make it a bad domain. Hack into it, put some malware on it, put some spam, put it in weird locations that someone wouldn't naturally look, but point a lot of links to it, and Google will just assume that is a really spammy website that does a lot of spammy stuff, and they'll continue to apply that sort of negative penalty over time. Penalize Whois owners. This is kind of a weird one. Did you guys know that Google cares if your Whois matches? You know that? So if your Whois matches a bad domain, they will assume that they're owned by the same person, and they will assume that the bad domain is probably part of the same network. So if you just make your Whois look exactly like the one over there, like the good domain, you can kind of trick Google into thinking this is probably a bad neighborhood. Now they won't apply a penalty immediately, but in combination with a lot of other things, they might. So just spam the crap out of them, which works really well. They also apply penalties to people who use Whois guard, by the way. They don't like that. They like to know who you are, which is interesting. Content length. If your page is too short or too long, they care. So when you break in, do something like chunked encoding or artificially break the page after a couple hundred bytes or something. Just break it every time you see it coming from a Googlebot. So Googlebot will assume that this page is only this long and go, man, that's a very thin page. I'm not going to send anyone there. Looks broken. And because the HTML doesn't validate or whatever, so just don't go there, which is great. Or the inverse of that, add a ton of really, really spammy text to the page. And there's all kinds of really interesting things you can do there. Like line breaks actually appear, like if you type a new line character, it'll often become a BR tag. So you can just type a couple 100,000, line breaks, and that'll become this gigantic, massive piece of HTML that Google will actually process to go, this page is freaking massive. It's really huge, even though it might only be 100,000 characters, which is actually relatively small. It'll translate into 4 times that, plus you can type a bunch of characters at the end, and so someone naturally scrolling would just assume the page ended. Google will assume the page is very long and start giving you penalties. Keyword density. This is a bit of an interesting one. You can basically change the keyword density on any page you can comment on. If you think about it, it's all skateboard, it's all about skateboards, and you start talking about something different below it, Google knows that that is still part of the page and will start treating that as part of the content. And in reality, it really is part of the content. I mean, it really, really is part of the content. So they're kind of right to make that assumption, but they're also kind of wrong in saying that the blog post is the same as the content. They're starting to get better about this, by the way, but for now, it's still broken. So any sort of latent semantic indexing of keywords and content. So if you add poor semantic content, so if it's about skateboards and I enter phentermine again on the content page, it can make it very hard for you to start ranking for skateboards because they're just going to assume it's spammy. Page load speed, this is actually one of my favorites. There's so many interesting things with page load speed in our world. So Google cares about page load in 2 completely different ways. One is when you load a page, how fast does the page actually return from the second they send the packet to the GET request to the second it's fully loaded and fully processed. So all of the content on the page has got to load, or at least visibly got to load. It can lazy load in the background, but the page from a user's perspective has got to load within, conservatively 6 to 8 seconds. That's slow. After that, they start penalizing you. So that's one way. The other way they do it is through traffic congestion using UDP. So they'll send UDP packets at you, and if they get congestion messages from you, they'll just assume that this page is probably behind a site that can't handle the amount of load that's being sent at it. So if you send a lot of UDP messages and start adding congestion to the network, Google will assume that it only has a certain amount of crawl equity available to this particular IP and will only deliver a certain amount of traffic to it. So you can artificially deflate the amount of times Google hits the page because Google's trying to be nice to you, right? And really, they are being nice if you think about it, because any additional load might actually impact your performance beyond the 6 to 8 seconds. But one of the interesting thing is Google does care about all that content that's being loaded on the page. So one of the things we found is there are some advertising networks that allow you to put JavaScript on them. So this is something that Matt Hansen and Jeremiah Grossman did very heavily a couple years back at Black Hat and at other conferences as well. But one thing you can do is take a piece of JavaScript that makes a request back to an asset that very slowly responds. Very slowly responds. So the ad itself is the performance loss. Under normal circumstances, that ad might load very, very quickly, but now the ad is taking forever. It's from Google's perspective anyway. You don't have to make it work that way for every user, but from Google's perspective, you should make this as slow as humanly possible. And artificially slow sometimes, sort of fast sometimes, and Google's like, for whatever reason, this ad network is misbehaving and causing this page to load slowly, so why don't you devalue this page until they remove the ad? And from the user's perspective, they have no idea how that's happening. They're like, no, my page is fast. It's really fast. Like, I can hit it 1,000 times. It's fast. And if you hack into them and add artificial weight statements this is called cloaking, by the way, if you've never heard that term. So if you cloak from Google's perspective, everything that Google sees is one thing, everything everyone else sees is something else. And there's all kinds of techniques to do this. For instance, what IP address are you coming from? Does it say Googlebot? Is it coming from Sunnyvale or whatever? Is it being pulled at these times of day where Google employees are most likely to work, and on, right? Page size, parameters, that kind of stuff. Attacks on login is kind of an interesting one. So you'll see this happen sometimes with auction houses. Someone will go to the login page and type in your username and password 10 times and lock you out. So when you try to log in to do the ad, try to buy the item or whatever, you can't because you're locked out. Oh shoot, I gotta do password recovery. Where's my phone? You know what I mean? Like, it takes you a while to get back into the account. You can do the same thing with negative SEO. You can make it very hard for them to log in, depending on whatever service they're using to administer their site. So you can basically lock them out of the account, make them slower at doing their daily tasks. Do it once a day, why not? I mean, just always make their life slow and boring and hard, and you can automate the crap out of all that stuff. So 31 through 36, there's 200, remember. Outbound link quality. You can put bad links on people's websites. There's tons and tons of different ways to do it. And they can go to spammy sites, it can go to malware. Malware is actually better. More malware that's in the same vicinity of the site, Google's just going to assume this is an unsafe neighborhood and your traffic starts going really, really bad. Grammar and spelling. This is a kind of a cool one. Google likes sort of colloquialism. They like sort of the common type of talk, if that makes sense. They don't like stuff that's like super technical. They don't like baby talk. They like right down the middle. And so if you have really technical words that you're using, it makes it very hard for the users to understand what the content is and therefore link to it and therefore continue to use it. So in your comments, whenever you're talking to a competitor on their own website, use extremely complicated words and misspellings. And Google will assume this is a site that people aren't going to understand it. So they will stop sending traffic to that particular webpage. Kind of neat, huh? Syndicated content, basically just copy the content and put it somewhere else. There's lots of different ways to do that. AMP is a very interesting technology. You guys familiar with AMP? No, none of you are familiar with AMP. Oof. Okay, so AMP is a way for you to distribute your content on Google's website. So Google will scrape your website. Remember the great scraper in place? They will scrape your website, put it on Google, and as long as it only includes very specific content, like Google ads, but only Google ads, no one else's ads, I wonder why they built that, very specific, you can have ahrefs, that kind of stuff, but it's got to be very, very tight. It's a very small amount of code, so it's designed to load really well on mobile, which you think I like since I do the smartphone exact thing. But it's bad because you never get to see your own traffic anymore, unless you happen to have analytics and somehow correlate the two together or whatever. So it's not, there's many problems with it. But if I take an AMP page and I scrape it and I put it somewhere else, it looks very different from Google's perspective than a normal HTML page. So they'll assume that the content is duplicate but yet different, even though it is actually identical, which is kind of neat. So supplementary content like any sort of facts or places where people do question and answer, all you have to do is just start asking a lot of really super inane questions that just bogs your customer support and marketing team down because they will not be able to handle the volume that you can create, trust me. You don't even have to ask that many questions before they're off talking to CEOs and vice presidents and like spinning up dev teams trying to answer all these crazy questions you got, like why can't it do blah, 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 and now it's a feature request internally and you just wasted a ton of time for a very, very little amount of effort. Number of outbound links, just the volume of links you put on a page, you can add a lot of them. We talked a little about reading level already. URL length. So URLs can be up to 1,024 long, but you don't have to respect whatever URL length that they put in. You can add a query string and add whatever you want after it. And so you can make the URL as long as you want and link to that, which makes Google think this URL is not something that people are going to share, so they get a little, not a penalty per se, but less equity. URL string, you can add all kinds of random text to the URL string. So if it's for Florida, you can add some other city or state or whatever in there, so it confuses Google about what this site is really about. They're trying to parse the parameters, but you're telling them conflicting things. It is a real URL, it really loads. You should have rel canonical back to the real URL if you don't. A, it's duplicate content. B, it's confusing content, and Google will be unclear on what you're trying to do here. There's another version of that where if you can embed content in the page, you can start speaking in other languages. And Google will have a hard time figuring out who should be looking at this content. Is this an American site? Is this a Danish site? Like, who should be looking at it? So they will be very hard-pressed to come up with the right answer unless you've given them the right clues on how to solve that. User-friendly layout. So you can do interesting things to push things beyond the fold. So you remember how I just did that thing with Google and what was above the fold? Anything that's below the fold, Google just assumes is not that interesting content. If it were interesting, you would have pushed it above the fold. So you could just push things below the fold. Just start adding a whole bunch of line breaks or a very, very large 1 pixel by 10,000 pixel wide photo or something. Just push the content way down so Google just assumes, oh, this is content that the consumer will never get to see. So it pushes all the other people's content way, way, way down the page. Just kind of so if it is if it's very thin content to begin with, if it's just like a quick note, someone's like, oh, I'm going to do blah, 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 or whatever, and it's maybe a paragraph or something, you can add a bunch of thin affiliate links back to other stuff, and Google will assume that that site is not a particularly trustworthy site. Pretty simple. Contact us page, spam the crap out of that thing. Oh, just spam the crap out of it. But then the secondary thing is that you could scrape it. If you're allowed to upload HTML, upload your own contact form that points to your website, and then market the crap out of that new contact form. So when Google says, where is the contact form for their company, they will assume your contact form is the correct contact form. And so you will be getting all of the contacts from now on. So their lead generation just drops off and make them super fast. So site uptime, distributed denial of service, and denial of service. So it turns out that slow loris was actually one of the most useful things ever invented for this purpose. And it's used very heavily by the marketers. Server location, one thing you can do is go to Maxmine's database and change the location. So you can tell Google that this server is actually located in Azerbaijan or something. Not that they'll necessarily believe you, but they may. Mobile optimized, basically AMP is very frail. One thing that people don't talk about is super duper duper frail. If you put a space in a URL, they will assume that AMP, the entire page is broken and they will not display anything. So you just upload a link with a space and suddenly the entire page isn't loaded. So I've been told I have 2 minutes. And I went from 5 to 2 very, very rapidly. So I'm not going to go through the rest of this now. Instead, I'm just going to get to the meat of it. What's that? You saying something to me? You looking at me? So there's all kinds of things you can do to screw with people's analytics as well. Which is a really interesting thing because people have conversion flows that they've tested that they know work really well. If you start screwing with that and saying, no, people are really coming into this under the path, people will start putting time and effort in marketing the wrong flow, which is really dangerous, especially if you use stuff like Google Analytics or Omniture. You're super vulnerable to this. Things Optimizely, all those JavaScript-based widgets, because you can see what they're trying to optimize for in the widgets. Send SEOs resumes to other companies. You can even shut the company down. In the state of Texas, it's 2 forms to shut a company down. 2 forms. All you have to do is know who the people who run the company are and submit it, and you're done. It's very, very easy. So, the point of all this. The point. So where there is some positive ranking signals, there are profits, and marketers know that that's where they should be. Where there's negative ranking signals, there are also the same profits. And where there are points of failure, there are profits. Which basically means that we are in a position where if we're not paying attention to SEOs, if we're not paying attention to the marketing team, we are in fact missing one of, if not the largest new attack vector coming out. This is where the black hats are going because they know they can make more money here. They know it's easier to attack you here than by doing the traditional bad things to your website. So if you aren't already talking to your marketing team, if you don't know them by a first name basis and you aren't sharing logs and digging into what they're seeing, you're probably missing one of the most existential threats here. Thank you very much.